Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of With the British Army in the Holy Land, by H. O. Locke. Chapter 7, Gaza and Beersheba.
The plan by which General Allenby defeated the Turks and captured their Gaza-Beersheba line involved three distinct operations. It will be remembered that the enemy defences consisted of a substantially continuous line from the sea at Gaza to Arab el-Tiyaha, where the left flank was bent back or refused at or about Sharia. Some 4.5 miles farther on were the detached works covering Beersheba, which thus constituted a strong outwork protecting the left flank of the main position. The decisive blow was to be struck against the left flank of the main Turkish position at Harira and Sharia. Before this blow could be struck, it was necessary to clear away the obstacle presented by Beersheba. It was also necessary to keep the enemy in doubt as to where the decisive blow was to fall, so another operation, on as large a scale as the available force would permit, and calculated both to mystify the enemy and to draw off a portion of his reserves, was undertaken on the immediate seafront at Gaza. Thus we get, firstly, the capture of Beersheba, secondly, the attack on the Gaza coastal defences, and thirdly, the main attack delivered against Sharia. This plan of operations was chosen for the following reasons. The enemy's works in the Harira Sharia sector were less formidable than elsewhere, and they were easier of approach than other parts of the enemy's defences. The capture of Beersheba was a necessary preliminary to the main operation, in order to secure the water supply at that place, and to give room for the deployment of the attacking force on the high ground to the north and northwest of Beersheba, from which direction the main attack was to be developed. When Beersheba was in our hands, we should have an open flank against which to operate, and full use could be made of our superiority in mounted troops. Moreover, a success here offered prospects of pursuing our advantage and forcing the enemy to abandon the rest of his fortified positions, which no other line of attack would afford. The difficulties to be overcome in the operations against Beersheba and the Harira Sharia line were considerable. Foremost among them were our old friend, the shortage of water, and, scarcely less formidable, the difficulty of transport. With regard to water, no supply existed in the area over which operations were to take place. An ample supply of water was known to exist at Beersheba, but it was uncertain how quickly it could be developed or to what extent the enemy would have damaged the wells before we succeeded in occupying the town. Except at Beersheba, no large supply of water would be found till Sharia and Harira had been captured. Arrangements had therefore to be made to ensure that the troops could be kept supplied with water, while operating at considerable distances from their original water base, for a period which might amount to a week or more. This was to some extent met by developing the water supplies at Akani, Kalasa, and Asluj, all places in no man's land some miles beyond our right flank. The transport problem was no less difficult. Beersheba, itself some 1,000 feet above the sea level, lies in a recess on the western slopes of the Judean hills. In the bed of this recess runs the Wadi es-Saba. Towards the northeast, a good metalled road leads gradually to the summit of the hills and on through Hebron to Jerusalem. Northwest, a good road led along the enemy's front to Gaza. The railway line, avoiding the heights, for the first 10 or 12 miles, follows approximately the direction of the Gaza road and then turns northwards along the plain or foothills. But south of the Gaza-Beersheba line, there were no good roads, and no reliance could therefore be placed on the use of motor transport. Owing to the steep banks of many of the wadis which intersected the area of operations, the routes passable by wheeled transport were limited, and, in many places, the going was heavy and difficult. Practically the whole of the transport available in the force, including 30,000 pack camels, had to be allotted to one portion of the eastern force, to enable it to be kept supplied with food, water, and ammunition, at a distance of 15 to 20 miles in advance of railhead. There already existed a branch from the Kantara military railway, which branch, leaving the main line at Rafah, ran to Shelal and Gamli, supplying the right of our line. Arrangements were made for this railhead to be pushed forward as rapidly as possible from Shelal towards Qam, some 7 miles to the east-southeast of Shelal, and for a line to be laid from Gamli towards Beersheba for the transport of ammunition. No man's land being some 10 or 12 miles wide in this sector, railway construction was carried on in front of our front line under cover of yeomanry outposts. This line of outposts was attacked on the morning of the 27th October by a strong reconnoitring party that the Turks sent out from the direction of Kawuka to make a reconnaissance towards Qam. On a division of our infantry coming up, the Turks withdrew. By the end of October, all our preparations were ready. The bombardment of the Gaza defences commenced on the 27th and continued nightly. On the 30th, warships of the Royal Navy, assisted by a French battleship, began cooperating in this bombardment. The actual infantry attack on Gaza was not intended to take place, however, until after the capture of Beersheba, and was delayed accordingly. The date fixed for the attack on Beersheba was the 31st October. The plan was to attack with 2 divisions, the hostile works between the Khalassa Road and the Wadi Saba, that is the sector to the southwest of the town. The works north of the Wadi Saba were to be masked with the Imperial Camel Corps and some infantry, while a portion of the 53rd Division further north covered the left of the corps. The right of the attack was covered by a cavalry regiment. Further east, mounted troops took up a line opposite the southern defences of Beersheba. A mounted force, starting from Khalassa and Asluj, beyond our original right flank, were detailed to make a wide flanking movement and attack Beersheba from the east and northeast. The units detailed for the attack moved by a night march and were in their appointed positions by dawn of the 31st. As a preliminary to the main attack, in order to enable field guns to be brought within effective range for wire cutting, an attack was made upon the enemy's advanced works on the high ground about a couple of miles southwest of the town, at Hill 1070. This had been successfully accomplished by 8:45 a.m., and the cutting of the wire proceeded satisfactorily, though pauses had to be made to allow the dust to clear. The assault was ordered for 12:15 p.m. and proved successful. By about 10 p.m., the whole of the works between the Khalassa Road and the Wadi Saba were in our hands. Meanwhile, the mounted troops, after a night march of, for a portion of the force, some 35 miles, arrived early on this same morning, the 31st, at about Qasim Zana, in the hills, some 5 miles east of Beersheba. From the hills, the advance into Beersheba from the east and northeast lies over an open and almost flat plain, commanded by the rising ground north of the town and flanked by an underfeature in the Wadi Saba, called Tel El Saba. A force was sent north to secure Bir es Sakali on the Hebron Road and protect the right flank. This force met with some opposition and was engaged with hostile cavalry at Bir es Sakali and to the north during the day. Tel El Saba was found strongly held by the enemy and was not captured till late in the afternoon. Meanwhile, attempts to advance in small parties across the plain towards the town made slow progress. In the evening, however, a mounted attack by Australian light horse, who rode straight at the town from the east, proved completely successful. They galloped over 2 deep trenches held by the enemy just outside the town and entered the town at about 7 p.m., capturing numerous prisoners. A very strong position was thus taken with slight loss, and the Turkish detachment at Beersheba almost completely put out of action. This success laid open the left flank of the main Turkish position for a decisive blow. The actual date of the attack at Gaza had been left open till the result of the attack at Beersheba was known, as it was intended that the attack on Gaza, which was designed to draw hostile reserves towards that sector, should take place a day or 2 before the attack on the Sharia position. After the complete success of the Beersheba operations, it was decided that the attack on Gaza should take place on the morning of the 2nd November. The objectives of this attack were the hostile works from Umbrella Hill, 2,000 yards southwest of the town, to Sheikh Hassan, on the sea, about 2,500 yards northwest of the town. The front of the attack was about 6,000 yards, and Sheikh Hassan, the farthest objective, was over 3,000 yards from our front line. The ground over which the attack took place consisted of sand dunes, rising in places up to 150 feet in height. This sand is very deep and heavy going. The enemy's defences consisted of several lines of strongly built trenches and redoubts. As Umbrella Hill flanked the advance against the Turkish works farther west, it was decided to capture it by a preliminary operation, to take place 4 hours previous to the main attack. It was accordingly attacked and captured at 11 p.m. on the 1st November by a portion of the 52nd Division. This attack drew a heavy bombardment of Umbrella Hill itself and our front lines, which lasted for 2 hours, but ceased in time to allow the main attack, which was timed for 3 a.m., to form up without interference. This attack partook of the nature of a modern trench-to-trench advance, as seen on the battlefields of France, with the cooperation of tanks and the accompaniment of other products of modern science. It was successful in reaching most of its objectives. The enemy losses were heavy, especially from the preliminary bombardment. Subsequent reports from prisoners stated that one of the divisions holding the Gaza sector was withdrawn on account of casualties, a division from the General Reserve being drawn into this sector to replace it. The attack thus succeeded in its primary object, which was to prevent any units being withdrawn from the Gaza defences to meet the threat to the Turkish left flank and to draw into Gaza as large a proportion as possible of the available Turkish reserves. Further, the capture of Sheikh Hassan and the southwestern defences constituted a very direct threat to the whole of the Gaza position, which could be developed on any sign of a withdrawal on the part of the enemy. Here, the force attacking Gaza stayed its hand, merely holding on to the positions already captured, while the main attack was being developed on the right. Having captured Beersheba on the 31st October, a force was pushed out early on the following day, the 1st November, into the hills north of Beersheba, with the object of securing the flank of the attack on Sharia, while mounted troops were sent north along the Hebron Road. Accordingly, the 53rd Division took up a position from Tawal Abu Jerwal, 6 miles north of Beersheba, to Muwayla, 3.5 miles farther west, and the 10th Division occupied Abu Ugeg on the railway, 6 miles from Beersheba. Next day, the 2nd, our mounted troops found and engaged considerable enemy forces to the north of Tawal Abu Jerwal. Accordingly, on the 3rd, we advanced in that direction towards Ain Kola and Kuwelfa, where the enemy were found to be holding a strong position with considerable and increasing forces. It will be borne in mind that this was only the right flank guard. Our main attack, which was to be delivered against Sharia, was not timed to commence until 2 or 3 days later. However, the enemy elected to employ the whole of his available reserves in an immediate counterattack. During the 4th and 5th, he made several determined attacks on the mounted troops in this locality. These attacks were repulsed, and the enemy's action was not allowed to make any essential modification to the original plan, which it had been decided to carry out at dawn on November 6th. It was this exhausting of the Turkish reserves, so early in the operations and so far away to the east as Kuwelfa, that paved the way for the success of our attack on Sharia. At dawn, on the 6th, the force detailed for the main attack had taken up positions of readiness to the southeast of the CAUCASUS system of trenches. The yeomanry opened the ball by assaulting the group of works forming the extreme left of the enemy's defensive system, following this up by an advance due west up the railway, capturing the line of detached works which lay east of the railway line. Meanwhile, London and Irish troops moved towards the CAUCASUS system, bringing forward their guns to within wire-cutting range. Soon after noon, these troops commenced their attack upon the southeastern face of the CAUCASUS system. This was completely successful in capturing all its objectives. Sharia Station was also reported as captured before dark. On this same day, the right flank guard, the 53rd Division, had successfully attacked Kuwelfa. The position at nightfall, then, was that our right flank guard were at Kuwelfa. The yeomanry had reached the line of the Sharia to Wadi Union, and the troops on the left were close to Herrera Redoubt, which was still occupied by the enemy. Next day, the 7th, the situation remained practically unchanged on our extreme right, the enemy maintaining his positions opposite our right flank guard. In the Sharia Herrera locality, the Herrera Tepe Redoubt was captured at dawn. Tel El Sharia was captured at 4 a.m., and the line was pushed forward about a mile to the north of Tel El Sharia. That night, the enemy withdrew. Meanwhile, on our extreme left, the bombardment of Gaza had continued. Another attack was ordered to take place on the night of the 6th to 7th. An attack was made at 11:30 p.m. that night against Outpost Hill and Middlesex Hill, south of the town, which met with little opposition. As soon after they had been taken, as patrols could be pushed forward, the enemy was found to be gone. Early in the morning, the main enemy force occupied the northern and eastern defences of Gaza. Rearguards were still occupying Beit Hanun and the Atawina and tank system, part of the Sihan group of works, from whence Turkish artillery continued to fire on Gaza and Ali Muntar until dusk. As soon as it was seen that the Turks had evacuated Gaza, on the morning of the 7th, a part of the force pushed along the coast to the mouth of the Wadi Hesi, some 8 miles north of Gaza, so as to turn the Wadi Hesi line and prevent the enemy making any stand there. This force reached the Wadi Hesi by evening and succeeded in establishing itself on the north bank in the face of considerable opposition from a Turkish rearguard. Cavalry had already pushed on round the north of Gaza and become engaged at Beit Hanun with an enemy rearguard which maintained its position till nightfall. This brings our history down to the night of November 7th to 8th. By the morning of the 8th, the enemy were in retreat all along the line. Meanwhile, what had been happening to our own party in the apex? The general plan of attack did not contemplate any advance from here. Nevertheless, it was necessary that this portion of the line should be firmly held, and it was more than likely that the enemy would try to create a diversion by raiding this inviting salient. By the end of October, liveliness was increasing all round, and mutual bombardments were growing more intense. Fortunately, a large number of the shells fired by the enemy were duds. We were puzzled at the time to know why duds figured so largely in this and following bombardments. Subsequent inspection of the enemy trenches afforded an explanation. Great dumps of ammunition had been formed by the enemy close to the guns, and these, for safety and concealment, had been placed in deep dugouts. On the evening of the 27th October, a great thunderstorm burst over Gaza, causing the enemy considerable damage, flooding the dugouts and presumably damping the fuses and ruining their ammunition. On the evening of the 3rd November, the enemy tried to create a diversion by raiding the apex. On this evening, we were sitting quietly having dinner in our headquarters dugout when sharp rifle fire was heard from the front line of the battalion on our right. We walked out and saw a veritable Brock's Benefit display of very lights. A telephone message from our front line informed us that a considerable party of the enemy had crept quietly up and were now prowling round our wire and trying to pick a way through. A hot fire from rifles, Lewis guns and machine guns soon convinced the enemy of the uselessness of attempting, without artillery preparation, a raid against an alert enemy well entrenched with wire intact. They were beaten off and withdrew to a fold in the ground a couple of 100 yards out in no man's land, where they were fired upon by our trench mortars. Nevertheless, they managed to rally and came forward again to the attack. This time, their reception was no more encouraging than before. Our artillery got into them with a barrage, and they withdrew. Now they sent up a red very light signal, whereupon a hostile barrage came down upon our trenches, under cover of which they not only withdrew themselves, but also removed their killed and wounded. It is a part of their religion to spare no pains in removing their dead and giving them a decent burial. A couple of deserters crept into our lines towards the morning, from whom we were able to gather something about their side of the operations. Desertion was fairly common among the Turks about this time, partly because rations were poor, but mainly because they had no stomach for the fight that they knew to be imminent. Insofar as this raid affected us, our trenches were badly smashed by the artillery, but our casualties were insignificant. The next evening, we sent a small patrol across no man's land, which, being boldly and pluckily led, crept right up to the enemy's trenches. Here they heard the sound of much traffic on the Gaza-Beersheba road, token doubtless of the impending withdrawal. More important from our immediate point of view the patrol heard sounds of an enemy concentration in their front trenches, in apparent preparation for another raid on the apex. Our artillery put salvos at once upon those trenches, and the raid of that night proved a damp squib. About midnight we were wakened from our slumbers by a thunderstorm, the thunder, lightning, and hail being provided by a deluge of bursting shells, splinters, and shrapnel bullets. When the barrage lifted, glimpses were caught of the enemy moving along our front wire, but this raid never succeeded in forcing an entrance to our trenches. We had every reason to remember the 5th of November. It came in with a display of fireworks. It went out like an inferno. Profiting by his previous experience, the enemy shelled a portion of our front deliberately from early evening until dark, with the obvious intention of cutting the wire on a portion of our sector. At 10 o'clock that night, down came another intensive bombardment, which lasted for an hour. Under cover of the darkness, the enemy even brought trench mortars on camels up to our wire to assist in the bombardment. Next morning, the ground looked like a veritable sea beach after a wreck. The litter consisted of splinters and duds of all sizes and descriptions, largely 5.9. This hostile barrage made a really satisfactory job of the wire cutting. As soon as it lifted, the enemy's infantry made a determined effort to penetrate our line. During the bombardment, our fellows had taken shelter in the narrow passageways behind the traverses, and so lost no time. Immediately the barrage lifted, in manning the fire step. They at once got busy with rifles, Lewis guns and machine guns, and gave the Turk, as he crossed the ruins of our wire, a distinctly warm reception. This proved more than enough for most of the enemy, but a few brave spirits succeeded in entering our trench and throwing bombs. They were not supported by their fellows, and were soon disposed of. At length, up went the now familiar red light, down came the closing barrage, the enemy drew off and we were left in peace. After these 3 abortive raids, the apex was left unmolested, except for occasional shelling on the 6th and 7th. On the 8th, we were relieved at the apex by lines of communication troops, in order that we might take part in the pursuit of the enemy, who were now in full retreat.
This concludes today's reading of With the British Army in the Holy Land, by H.O. Locke. Join us also tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.